Isaac,
Rabbi, good morning.
hi, a time of reflection. How exciting. I can't
Oh,
imagine what reflection is like. So let's find out.
I'm looking forward. So, Rabbi, good morning. Let's get to, so there were a couple of things I've been thinking about. One is so we discussed Jesus' call to Andrew and to Peter. Now, Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. Now, this comes in the Gospel of John, right? And so, and in the Gospel of John, it also speaks of the other disciple. And I think it sounds like that was either James or that was either James or John. So all that is say when Jesus was starting, um, so I can see why Jesus wanted to be so far away. It's one that John the Baptist was in prison, was put in prison, and also some of his early disciples of Andrew and probably James and John were disciples of John. And if Jesus hung out with them, and given this commonality between John's sermon and Jesus' sermon, I think that gives more context as to why Jesus wanted to be so far away. But also related to that, you
Maybe.
know, yeah, also related to that, when Jesus said, "Follow me," right? Um, we discussed this earlier, but it didn't quite sink in when Jesus said, "Follow me." This is countercultural. It's usually the students who go to the rabbi saying, "We want to follow you," but in this case, he meant follow me as in both literally follow me and also spiritually by metaphorically follow me, right? This is a rabbi seeking out his disciples, and I think we touched upon that. There are these two models of one being of somebody who's charismatic versus but anyway, I'm intrigued. Like, would this have made the people wonder or look at this with amazement, as in, here's a rabbi seeking at people saying, "Come, come, follow me," um, and not the other way around. And then the third and the last thing is, so we it
Well,
in
is that a question? I'm not sure I get it.
Yes. So it's a question. So when the early listeners, when they heard Jesus, a rabbi telling his disciples, "Follow me," it's not as in the disciples seeking him, but as in the rabbi seeking out his disciples. How would they like? How would they have interpreted this? Would this have been subversive,
Are you
or you
saying more
think?
so than our original conversation around follow me? Because I feel like we discussed the different models of disciples trying to find teachers versus teachers finding disciples. Are you asking past that discussion?
I mean, so thank you for the discussion. So when we heard that, I didn't quite fully understand. And now that I've had some time to think about that, I now realize how jarring this should have been. As
Yeah.
in
So
these.
your first point, you set up that they might have already been disciples
Oh,
based on other texts. So therefore, it would not be jarring if that's true. It's only jarring if you try to code call a person in the street, right? Come and follow me. So I feel like it depends. I feel that we should always read Matthew. Um, we should compare it to Mark, but we should always read it somewhat more independent of the other texts, and therefore the background is that the disciples are not introduced. So I feel it's meant to be jarring and show the miraculous nature of someone who's able to kind of like almost like if you imagine in mythical ideas where you have a harpy or one of those beings who could sing and
mhm.
enchant someone. I forgot what they're called. They're on like an island. It's a monster. Anyways, they sing and they enchant someone, and they're like locked into the vision. I'll look up what the word is. I can't remember, but I think it's supposed to be like that.
Uh, Thank you. And then the third thing is in Matthew 4, we discussed about that
Oh,
Jesus was preaching
and the word is a siren. Yeah,
a
a
siren.
siren. Yeah, the sirens are the ones who kind of like, and just to be clear, the sirens also happen around water. So you could also have like this, and whenever you have water, it's always representing like a different kind of universe. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like enchanting them to that. So they use music, and Jesus uses commands. Okay, sorry, just go on.
Thank you. So on the last one, right? So we in Matthew 4, we discussed where Jesus was healing, preaching, and they brought all these people from around the regions, and it does not
Teaching, preaching, curing. Right.
curing, right? And now it does not speak about the gospel doesn't mention what reaction or how the people responded to him. Now, this act, this his preaching, his healing, his teaching, this could also be seen as what this is also a form of preaching, teaching, and healing of the disciples too. Because even though, let's say, so is it fair to say that he wasn't only preaching to the crowd, but this was a way? So this experience of this whole time of teaching and preaching was also an education for the disciples. Like I can't. I mean, I would imagine they probably
100%.
they probably looked at this with some form of like, what is this guy doing? But I'm surprised that the evangelist does not mention how Andrew or John or Peter, how, like even how they experience this. It doesn't mention that, because in the gospel, John didn't do any miracles, or there is no mention of that.
On that point, let me ask you a question. So you're asking a question based on, you have an assumption about what the evangelist should talk about from a disciple's perspective. But this is the question we see throughout the Bible, and this is a little secret I like to tell people about the Bible, about the old.
Secret.
I don't know if it's a secret. It's a reality that when I say it, it's so obviously it's true, but a lot of times we don't recognize it. It's almost like very surprising. I'm not going to speak on the New Testament because I don't know, but the Old Testament, no, because like, what do I know? But the Old Testament, the Tanakh, is not a story about the Jewish people. It feels like a story about the Jewish people, about the Israelites and what they did, but it's not. It's in a story about the prophets in the elite class. The books of Exodus to Deuteronomy is not a story about the Israelites and how they formed tribes. Now, it's a story about Moses. It's a story about the teacher. It's a story about the leader. And all the people fail and they challenge him
I
and they
see.
come back. So again, I don't want to speak ubiquitously about the New Testament, but I wouldn't be surprised if the reason that the 12 disciples are included is not because we want to know how Judas cheated or how this guy disappeared. It's that these are the challenges that Jesus experienced. And this is how he responded. And I feel it's a very elitist attitude. And a lot of times when you hear it, oh, the masses, it's the opposite of Bernie Sanders. Like the masses don't matter. It's the masses are the ones who are always failing and cheating and getting like executed for doing horrors. And Moses is always the one responding. So I feel it's the same model, a New Testament. And you can pick your favorite book. The story of David is not the story of how he had to, this 10,000 people died here, the wars are. The story of David and the story of Solomon and the story of Ezra and the story of Joshua. So I think this is one of the secrets of understanding elitist Judaism, that certain people stand out in history. And those people are the people that you're meant to emulate. The others, the reason we don't know their names because they don't matter. And disciples, listen, we know the names, but if anything, I always view them as challenges to Jesus' message. Again, like, let's be honest, some disciples are good, some are bad, so I don't want to overgeneralize. But the story, it's the Jesus story. It's not the Peter or Andrew story. That's what
Okay, I think now that's a great observation. This is the story of Jesus and not about the disciples. And so, from the evangelist perspective, what matters is what Jesus did. These disciples, they were all they're supporting actors on the stage, but they are the main actor, and the focus should be on Jesus. But I also liked what he spoke about the Tanakh. The Tanakh, as you said, it's less about the Jewish people; it's more about the prophets and the leaders of those time, Moses,
in my opinion.
Dave. Well, as a rabbi, I mean, you said your opinion. What he's saying is back in the Old Testament is the focus should be on the preachers or on the prophets and what they did in their lifetime, and the people, the masses, the masses surrounding them, they were the means, or they were there to amplify certain themes, or to keep the focus on on the people, again, on those chosen prophets or leaders of those times. Would that be fair?
That's how I see it. Again, like, this is a bad example, but even the Gospel of Peter is not about Peter. The apocryphal text that is generally viewed as pseudepigraphical by the Catholic Church and others. It's still about Jesus. The Gospel of Peter, the Gospel about the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of
Well,
John. Everything's about Jesus.
that's right. All the entire world is about.
It's interesting in the 500 to 0 BCE, we do see some texts that take like the biblical lines as starting points, and there are like secondary sources where we'll talk about the Book of Jubilees and other books where they use the text and they kind of branch off, like the fallen ones from heaven, who are they? And they'll have a whole conversation about that. The angels, who are they? But that's what you do as a secondary source. Like when you start using the main text, you start figuring out what happened in between. Yeah, but this is my opinion. I think it's a big mystery to see, why aren't women mentioned more? Why come we don't know the perspective of the slave? How come we don't know what Moses did for those 40 years? Because like these are side points. Like We're
And I
very
think so,
focused
yeah, and I
on the
think this
story.
makes so much of sense, right? So earlier we were wondering why wasn't Joseph mentioned? Like Mary pops in, pops out, Joseph pops in, pops out. We have one verse about them, and we don't have much about them. It felt like were they just a means towards an end? But I think now that I think about this on this perspective, the focus is not about how Mary felt. I mean, though how she felt or how Joseph felt it's important. It's not to deny this, but the purpose of the gospel was to speak about the Messiah and his life. And so from that perspective, Mary and Joseph become supporting actors on the stage who kind of pop in and pop out as it fits with the narrative to keep the Messiah
Yeah,
the
again,
center
like I'm not
stage.
trying to make a grander point. I'm not saying, like, for example, in the Old Testament, I'm not saying that Sarah is not an important matriarch, or that different people in history who are, like, the sons of Aaron, the first two who die and the next two who survive. I'm not saying they're not important folk, but I'm saying the Bible is not a story about them. They are the characters to know how Aaron responded, and Peter, Paul, Mary, whoever you want, are all the side characters.
Peter, Paul, Mary, Rabbi, Raz, Isaac, again, we are all actors on the stage who pop in and pop out as it fits,
Exactly.
as the situation requires. Anyway, on that note, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, speak to you soon.